Our first presenter this morning will talk about high-impact experiential learning. His name is Brooks Anderson. He's a senior majoring in political science. And the title of his session is The Maryland Student Legislature and the Importance of Low-Risk Experience. During his talk today, he'll be talking about his work as both a Council of State member and legislator and how it has impacted his overall education. With that, I will turn it over to you, Brooks.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll share screen. I've brought up a little presentation to help guide my words. So, yes, I'll be presenting on the Maryland Student Legislature and the importance of low-risk experience. I am Brooks Anderson. So I want to define low-risk experience first. In the context of Maryland Student Legislature, you can either fail it or pass it. You have your failure or your success stories. If Maryland Student Legislature doesn't work for you specifically, here's basically what happens. You find out that you don't like the legislative process because we endeavor to model it after the Maryland State Legislature as close as possible. You may find that you don't have the knack for writing or debating legislation, but it's not for everybody, I admit that. And the worst case scenario is you hate it, you don't have a great time, and you don't get the one credit that's offered, which is really no stress because with the way that Hood College structures its credit options, there's very few circumstances where losing one credit drops you out of full-time studentness. So there's always 3 credit or 4 credit classes, but Maryland Student Legislature is offered for a 1 credit opportunity. On the other hand, there's your success stories, where you weren't even too enthusiastic about it, but you find out that you absolutely love the process of passing legislation. You discover that you have the knack for writing and debating legislation. In the best case scenario, you have all this good experience, you find out this is maybe what you want to do with your entire life, and you get a credit on top of it all. So the Maryland Legislature offers 1 credit every year or every semester up to 4 times. So it's very low risk, but you get all the experience of a legitimate legislative process. And that's really what we try and go for here. So the question is, what is MSL? It's basically composed of 4 aspects. There's bill submission, which is the writing and submitting of a bill to the Attorney General, and we'll get more into that title later. There are the events known as LTI and session, which is basically a leadership training institute, and then the mock sessions where we actually present, debate our legislation. There is the, and MSL is a statewide organization. So there are organizations across the state. We go all the way to Frostburg. There's one at Hood. In the past, there's been one at UMBC. But all of those organizations, we don't meet every week, the entire group. So there are school-sized delegations that have their meetings usually weekly. And then there's the credit opportunity, which isn't offered at all schools, but at Hood it is. And when it comes to the events, what you really are getting out of them is that you're meeting Maryland politicians and forging connections at LTI, fall, winter, and annual session. So for those of you who are politically savvy in the local scene, the man on the left of your screen is Bill Ferguson. He is one of the actual members of the Maryland State Legislature based in Annapolis, Maryland, and he will be at the next session that we host. So he'll be speaking to us, and we'll have opportunities to ask questions, engage in dialogue. And from these events, students have actually had the opportunities to pursue full-fledged jobs as well as internships. So the whole scale of the process is open to you from who you meet during these events. I know time is of the essence, so I'll keep it rolling. I want to tell you about the Council of State, which is the group that I'm a part of right now. There's the governor who's in charge of everything. He has a very ceremonial position during session, but he is one of our greatest advocates across the state for growing the organization. The lieutenant governor, who is basically his right-hand man, and usually is in charge of working with the recruiting aspect. So our current lieutenant governor has been working her absolute butt off to get other delegations to come in. So there are schools that used to have delegations that don't anymore, and she's been working to bring them back in. There's a Speaker of the Assembly. That's who I was last year, and this year I've had a sort of demotion to Attorney General, just because I like to have different opportunities to debate during legislation, because the Speaker of the Assembly, much like the Speaker of the House in the actual legislator, doesn't have a grand opportunity to debate because they're directing the debate. They are on top of the parliamentary procedure, which we'll talk about more later. The Attorney General, that's my role this year, is all about the work done behind the scenes. So in between sessions, the legislation gets sent to me for edits and then is organized according to its topic and its brevity. And then I decide what is debated when. Then there's a Secretary of State that helps keep time during debate and is generally considered, the secretary to the governor. So they help with a lot of the timekeeping. And there's a comptroller who controls the purse strings. When registration happens, the money goes to the comptroller and then is filtered into the greater organization. Those are the statewide leadership positions, but if you start dipping your toes into Maryland Student Legislature and you find out, okay, that might be a bit ambitious for me, what's something a little bit lower level? There's a district chairperson. We call them the DCPS, and they're the local leadership. They're like the local presidents, and they help organize the local meetings. My background, my freshman year, I was just a humble delegate, and I was honored to receive the award for the most outstanding orator of that year. So I thought, well, where do you go from being the best speaker of the year, hardly speaking at all? So I ran for the Speaker of the Assembly, was voted into the position, and for that year, my sophomore year, I was directing the debate. So I recognized people who wished to speak and did the jobs I described as Speaker of the Assembly. This year, I'm the Attorney General, so I have a pretty well-rounded experience in MSL, both on the top and the bottom. And it's honestly been a great focusing point for my education as far as what are you here to do and what do you want to do in the future. So this is where I want to spend most of my time, on the legislation. So I have an act and a resolution, and I'll describe the difference between them from my freshman year. The act is something that I wrote, and it was my first time. It was the fall session, so the very first event I'd ever gone to, and I thought, okay, let's write something relatively down the line, but not too serious, not too hot button. I want to just see what the process is like. And this is what it looked like. I wrote a bill on indecent exposure because in one of my classes that freshman year, there had been a debate about, well, men and women aren't treated equally under the law with regards to what is acceptable for your attire. So men can walk around shirtless in most places, especially parks. And if women do it, there's going to be a lot of hubbub. So I wrote this act that fundamentally changes what the law says. So I changed the criminal code. And what is in all caps is what I added, and what is struck through is what's taken away. So I didn't have to take away anything else, but I was able to redefine the term indecent exposure from a legal standpoint, which was very, very interesting and a fun activity to do. But what really was a winning point for me in Maryland Legislature was being able to debate it. Because there were people who, saw me stand up for this bill and thought, okay, this guy, what are his motivations for allowing women to go topless? And as I gave my speech about, the nature of equality, I saw people actively change their stance and what they were going to say during questioning to be on my side during the legislation. That's probably the most magical thing in Maryland Legislature. So an act fundamentally changed the law. By contrast, there's a resolution, and this was proposed by Ashley Rowles, our future DCP and our current DCP. There's a bunch of whereas clauses that talk about what is, there's a bunch of whereas clauses that establish the reasoning for the legislation, and then a therefore be it resolved. So there's no hard numbers, there's no impetus to act. But what we do have is a statement of support. So the Maryland Student Legislature urges the Maryland General Assembly to begin replacing asphalt roads with concrete roads. So why do we phrase it like that? Because when legislation, acts, or resolutions get passed in the Maryland Student Legislature, they go directly to the General Assembly. And the greatest success stories we have are from before my time, where legislations involving, everything from, even small things like plastic bags in grocery stores have been affected by legislation that we've passed at the student level and has then gone to the General Assembly and then been passed into actual law. So that's where I call this low risk experience, because if you don't get it passed, you haven't lost your chance at re-election. No one knows who you are. You still have your time to campaign if you actually want to do this in real life, but you can still do actual good.
All right, Robert, we have just a few seconds left before we hit or Brooks, we have a few seconds left before we hit our Q&A session. So.
All right, I will wrap this up. So the resolution was about asphalt roads and the act was about indecent exposure in public. Those are relatively tame subjects, but when a hot button issue arises, we've debated abortion, we've debated marijuana, we've debated just about everything under the sun. How do we keep things civil and cordial? Parliamentary procedure. Here's basically the way we do it. The Speaker of the Assembly will recognize people to be the floor leaders, and then time will be split evenly amongst both sides. The floor leaders can then delegate time out, but while someone holds the time, they can't be interrupted, except for when someone stands up and the Speaker of the Assembly says, "The Speaker shall suspend, for what reason does the delegate rise?" They'll say, "Query to the Speaker," whatever they rose for. And that's the only opportunity you have to interrupt somebody. So it keeps things cordial. At the end of the day, the bulk of my education in political science has been a history education. How has terrorism impacted the political sphere? How has authoritarianism impacted the political sphere? And what MSL has done is given me and all of my fellow delegates a lens directly into the active political process outside of theory. And we've done it with minimal risk and maximum efficiency. So thank you all for listening. And that's been MSL.
Brooks, thank you so much for that presentation. If anybody has any questions about Brooks's presentation, you can type them into the chat feature, and we're happy then to pass them along to Brooks. I have one question for you right out of the gate, Brooks, which is, if a student were interested in participating in the Maryland Student Legislature, how would you recommend that they learn more or get involved with this organization?
Yeah, sure. So we have two advisors. We have Dr. Tucker Wargs and we have Dr. Robinson. You can find their emails relatively easily. They're also in the political science department. If you shoot them an email, they can get you in the class. You can also join the class through regular registration with their permission to get your credit. And if you reach out to myself, I'll put my email out there. I'm more than happy to send numbers around and get you in contact with our governor. He was actually from Hood College this year. I'll get you in contact with the DCP and anyone else you need to talk to. Also, oh yes, Dr. Robinson through the website in the chat, msl.org.
Okay, great. If you wouldn't mind sharing with us, what are your intentions for your future career?
This is my favorite question. When I came to Hood, I didn't know what I wanted to do at all, but I knew that I liked looking at the Monk debates and different videos about policy and theory. So I thought political science is the closest concrete job route that I can take. And then just this last summer, I kind of had an epiphany and decided that I would be graduating this spring. I had enough credits to do it, and I would be fast tracking myself towards seminary because I'm going to be a pastor.
That's wonderful news. There is a question in the chat I'll share with you. It says, have you been able to connect your practical experience in MSL to any specific theoretical concepts? You mentioned equality, for example, you have learned in political science courses. So the connection of the experience to any specific theories or perspectives?
Well, like I said, my education in political science has been largely an education in history. So as far as theory courses, I'm actually in ancient medieval political theory right now with Dr. Rabayadek. And it's actually been very interesting how I have not been able to do it much during my speeches, but you can see how people will have, there's one. my sophomore year, there was someone who wanted to relocate horses on the Maryland-Virginia border to somewhere that was less storm prone, because every time a storm rolled through, a bunch of horses died. And the entire opposition to that policy was who gets authority over them, because right now they kind of roam back and forth. So if the Marylanders get to take the horses and put them somewhere safe, that gives them more of a claim to the horses. And in the bounds of MSL, we don't actually have jurisdiction over what Virginians do. So we can't mandate that Virginians do something. And if we do something that, if we say that the Marylanders must do something, then that'll cause strife between us and Virginia. So there's also the issue of the place that they wanted to move them was very rocky, very mountainous, and the horses would basically be guaranteed to break almost as many legs as they would during a storm. So that was a case study in the law of unintended consequences, where yes, you're trying to do something good, there is a problem that needs to be solved, but the route you've chosen might just make it worse, regardless of your intentions.
That sounds like a fascinating case study. And thank you so much for your presentation. I'm sure if we were all here in person, we'd be applauding you right now. And congratulations on presenting at Spires. So thank you, Brooks. I think we're ready for our next session now.